Hey friends, this year, just for fun, I'm making a popular state dessert every week. I'm going alphabetically and we're starting off strong with Alabama's Lane cake. This is a yummy, boozy, layered cake that's quite complicated to make, and I'm going to show you how I did it. Now, I used Emma Lane's original recipe from 1898, so there's some interesting directions, and I'll tell you about them as I go. Step one is going to be the batter. And you're looking at my counter and you're thinking, what a mess. But really, these are all the ingredients you need to make this cake. We're going to start by taking 8 eggs and we're going to separate the whites from the yolks and set those yolks aside. Now we're going to take some cake flour, and we need 3 1/4 cup of cake flour and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And we're going to sift those together into a bowl, and that is our dry ingredients. Now I'm going to read you the recipe from Emma Lane. It says, sift the flour and baking powder together 3 times. I only did it once. Cream the butter and sugar until perfectly light. Add it alternatively a little at a time, milk and flour until all are used, beginning and ending with the flour. So here are the wet ingredients. That's 2 sticks of butter and 2 cups of sifted sugar. I don't know what was going on with the sugar in the 1800s, but it must have been lumpy. So I just did it as I was told and sifted that sugar. I creamed those all together like the recipe said, and then we're going to take 1 cup of milk. And just like the recipe, we're going to add those alternatively milk, dry ingredients until that was fully combined. This was a pretty stiff batter at this point. Now, this cake was popularized by Emma Lane while she was living in Alabama in the 1890s. The recipe was printed in a cookbook called Some Good Things to Eat. But the Lane cake was also mentioned twice in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and since then it has become Alabama's state cake. Now from this point, we need to add in the egg whites that we separated. That was 8 egg whites. And the recipe says, beat in the well-whipped whites and vanilla. So I made these sort of a soft peak, and then I added a teaspoon of vanilla to this, whipped it together and just until it was combined, and then we're going to add this to the rest of our batter. Now, like I said, that batter was pretty stiff, so I decided to add this in 2 parts. I added in about 1/4 of it, stirred it together to get the batter a little less stiff, because I think the point of adding these whipped whites is to make the cake light and fluffy. So I didn't want to make the whites not fluffy anymore. So I added it in 2 parts, but you can see it's still pretty stiff when I stirred these together. Now from here, her recipe says bake in 4 layers using a medium-sized pan tins with 1 layer of ungreased brown paper in the bottom of each tin. Not what I'm used to. I'm used to spraying it with non-stick cooking spray. So this was hard for me, but I wanted to be as authentic as possible. So I did take some parchment paper, cut that in circles to layer in the bottom of my cake tins. However, I just couldn't help myself and I had to use some non-stick cooking spray, and it worked out perfectly. These slid right out of the pans, so I don't regret using that. Now, I just split this batter into 2 and made 2 cakes, and then I cut those in half to make the 4 layers. And you'll see me do that in just a moment. Now, we're going to put these in the oven at 350 degrees, and they cook for 35 minutes. And you'll see as they come out, they are beautifully golden brown. I did check them with a toothpick, and that came out nice and clean. I set these on the stove just to cool for about 10 minutes while they were still in their cake pans, and then I turned them over onto a cooling rack and let them cool until they were completely cooled, about an hour or so. And you can see that parchment peels off just perfectly. Now, like I said, I cut these in half so we would have 4 layers, and that worked out just perfectly. Now, step 2. Let's get to making the filling. We're going to start by taking 1 cup of raisins. I used golden raisins, and a 1/2 cup of bourbon. And I'll tell you about that part in a minute. But we're going to let these soak while we get the rest of the filling together. And the rest of the filling is 1 cup of sugar, those 8 egg yolks that we had set aside earlier, and 1 stick of butter. And we're going to mix these together with our electric mixer. And now I'll read to you what she says in her recipe. Pour into a small, deep stew pan and cook on top of the stove until quite thick, stirring all the time, or it will be sure to burn. So, I mean, not too specific, but that's exactly what I did. I put it in a pan, I kept on stirring until it got nice and thick, and this really did get thick. I thought this was going to be kind of like a custard while I was making it, but once you add all of the additions, it's not like a custard at all. From here, I added 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then my toppings I chose, which were chopped pecans, which is very traditional, 1 cup of sweetened coconut flakes, those boozy raisins, and then I added the zest of 1 orange. I did see that in multiple recipes, and I thought that would be a great addition to this. Now, I'm going to read you what she says about the bourbon. She says 1 wine glass of good whiskey or brandy. Now, I mean, a wine glass nowadays could be multiple sizes, and that's why I choose to put a 1/2 cup of bourbon in there. Now we stir that all together, and we're gonna spread that onto our cake. So on the first layer, I just took that filling, and it is so thick, and spread it onto the cake. And at this point, wow, you can smell that bourbon, but it's a good smell. And once you have this in the cake, it really does mellow out. Now, I have seen multiple recipes with some other alternatives. I would suggest orange juice because that orange flavor was so good with the orange zest. But I have seen recipes using white grape juice. So you can definitely substitute some other liquid instead of the bourbon or brandy if you don't like it like that. Now, once we get all our layers together, we're going on to step 3, which is the frosting. And her recipe just says frost with boiled icing. Well, that's pretty vague, so I had to look up a boiled icing recipe, which also you may have heard of a 7-minute frosting. So that's what I decided to make. And it is 1.5 cups of sugar along with 2/3 cup of water and a pinch of cream of tartar or a 1/4 teaspoon of vinegar, which is what I used. You're going to want to boil that without stirring it until it gets to 245 degrees. Once it's at 245, you are going to pour it in with 3 egg whites that you have whipped to soft peaks. And this is so tricky because you need to pour that down the side of your glass bowl, and don't let your beaters touch it, but you need to whip it inside of these egg whites. So it is tricky. Now, I would say if your mom or your grandma has made a Lane cake for you, you better give them a hug and show some appreciation because this was complicated and took me hours to make. But it was worth it because it was fun and it tasted good. So now we're going to whip this for 7 minutes. And I think that's why some call it a 7-minute icing. You can see how nice and shiny that is. It's so sticky. It's like marshmallow cream, and it was really good, you guys. Now I'm going to frost this, but I'll speed it up because it did take me some time. However, it was super easy to work with because this frosting is so sticky, it just sticks to itself. I just put it all over the cake, and then I used my offset spatula to make little swirls in the top so it was nice and pretty, and then I smoothed the sides all out, which worked out really well with this nice sticky frosting. It was really easy to work with. Now you can do whatever you want from here. You could serve it just as is, but I wanted to make mine nice and pretty, so I added some pecans and some cherries to the top to make that just look oh so nice. Now I'm going to cut into this so you can see all of those layers. This was such a delicious cake. It was nice and spongy, really strong orange and bourbon flavors in those layers. A great presentation, so pretty. Now, this was a complicated recipe and not something you're going to make very often, but I can see definitely prize-winning cake at the fair for Miss Emma Lane. Here, I cut another piece so you can see all those layers on that cake. Now, if you like this recipe, please like and subscribe. Come back next week. I'll be making these popular state desserts all year. I can't wait to see what the other states have in store for me, but this one was a great start to this fun adventure of making desserts for all 50 states. Thank you guys so much for watching.